Everyone, welcome to Monday through Friday, Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. This is episode number 11. My name is George Ortega, and we're recording this on July 21st, 2020 at 10:14 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm going to just start this episode by just reviewing the basics. We've gotten into various details of, for example, vaccines and, related issues, but it's important to just keep going over and over the basics until you appreciate the importance of it. All right. This pandemic, like MERS, SARS, Ebola, Zika, like so many of them, they're zoonotic. They're caused by animals. And this one happened to have been caused in a wet market with wild animals. But outbreaks of the kinds of infectious diseases that the coronavirus is are regularly found in our factory farms. And outbreaks occasionally are found also in smaller farms, family farms. For example, the 1918 Spanish flu, they believe came from a family farm, either a pig farm or a chicken farm. And the way that works is, all it takes is for, a pig, for example, to eat a half-eaten fruit that a bat maybe was eating, and the pig gets infected, and it doesn't have to require the really unsanitary conditions of a factory farm to spread these viruses, these pandemics. All right, but this is about how to move into the future as we move away from this, as safe as possible from future pandemics. Okay, so the best option is for us to simply go vegan, for the entire world to stop eating animals. That would be the safest. In addition to that, that's to prevent the outbreaks that turn into epidemics and then potentially pandemics. We also need to work on vaccines, and that it's so complicated. The hurdles to that are so monumental that it's a limited kind of response. And since we're not going to anytime soon, I don't believe, I should probably promote it more, all go vegan. We are very, very fortunate that in 2013, a brand new industry was introduced, where we can take cells, take a biopsy, a grain of rice from a cow or a pig or a chicken, even with a chicken wing or chicken feather rather. You can take a small section of that feather. And basically, they take these cells and they grow them in labs. And these cells have to be grown in completely sanitary conditions. So that's why they represent our best chance of avoiding future pandemics. There's absolutely no opportunity for a bat to infect one of these, cell cultures. Again, they're in labs or in sanitary environments. All right, so we're moving in that direction. And, incidentally, these new foods are going to be much healthier for us, than the meat and dairy and fish we buy, we buy in the supermarkets that come from animals. Quick example, they can be made without cholesterol, without saturated fat. And this isn't genetic engineering. This is just the way the processes that they use. So, okay, well, this is our only option. And what this show is probably most about is that you know, there are about 40 or 50 startups that you know, they came into being soon after 2013, after the Mark Post of the Netherlands just premiered this first, you know, lab-grown hamburger patty in a London event. And so the problem is that combined, all of them have about maybe $1 billion invested in that industry. It's going to happen. You know, I mean, like if you have like 10, 20 years, you know, of time to wait for an excellent investment, you know, shares of a stock, this couldn't be better because it's absolutely going to happen. But the problem is that at this rate of investment, it may take 10 years or longer for various kinds of research challenges that still need to be met to be accomplished. For example, right now they can grow these in the labs, but they need to scale it up. They need to scale it up to industrial production. They still have to, you know, perfect some of the mediums, the growth mediums for the cells, and then naturally more complex meat products like, let's say, sirloin steak or T-bone steak. That's a few years out. It's a much more complicated process, but basically just like chicken nuggets, beef, hot dogs, you know, pork, you know, they can do this now, but again, to bring it to market at competitive prices, so you're not paying any more for these products than you are for the meat and dairy and egg products you buy now. It probably will, you know, at this rate of progress, perhaps 10 years or longer. Now, the problem with that is we don't have perhaps that time to wait. These viruses are coming more and more frequently, and some of them, as we're seeing now, are very virulent. And you know, I say this relatively because the coronavirus is a relatively mild virus compared to some others that have threatened us, and we've been lucky. We've been extremely lucky with these others. All right, now one would think that you know, developing that it could be 10, 15 years before we develop vaccines to vaccinate us against many of these, but that's I think a much more complex problem, and it doesn't solve everything. In other words, like, see, the problem is especially these factory farms with amazingly unsanitary conditions. So in addition to these pandemics that we're experiencing now that come from viruses, what we have to worry about, and you know, scientists have been warning us about this for decades, we have antibiotics that are extremely useful to keeping us healthy, you know, but the problem is the more we use them, the more these bacteria get resistant to the antibiotics that we use. They mutate, they find ways to avoid, you know, being killed by these antibiotics that we have. And so the more we use, the sooner they'll develop these resistances. And we're worried about these superbugs. We're worried about bacteria developing that we don't have antibiotics to address, you know, to treat. And so the problem is, if we rely just on vaccines and antiviral medications, you know, once a person's sick already, to just get them better, if we relied on that and maintained our factory farms, we would still have to worry about this antimicrobial, antibiotic resistance that many experts have suggested is a greater threat to our human existence, our human civilization, than even climate change. Okay, so that I think is why it's not nearly enough for us to pursue these vaccines, these vaccinations. You know, first they might take 10, 15 years, and the other problem with vaccines is unless they can find some way to develop them that that address all kinds of viruses, regardless of how they mutate, because these viruses mutate all the time. They get more virulent, they get more contagious. You know, we need to be able to we need to be able to end the factory farming because of this threat. Okay, the viruses, vaccines against viruses, against flu viruses, they're not going to protect us against this antibiotic resistance. And that's the main reason why we can't be complacent and say, well, we have these vaccines that in 10, 15 years are going to save us. Because, again, the threats emerge, and this antibacterial, I mean, they could conceivably develop an antibiotic that works against all bacteria that they can't mutate against potentially. But again, that's probably 10, 15, 20 years out, if that. And there's another component to this. Let's say these vaccine, antiviral, antibacteria strategies were effective. We also have, like I'm talking to the 90% of you here in the United States that believe in God or a higher power. I mean, you understand that part of this belief entails this idea that when we do good, and we've done a lot of good as a species, as a humanity, we get rewarded. We're living in better times today, and this was like the theme of yesterday's show, than ever, by so many measures. It's unbelievable. So we've done a lot of good, but, a person can do a lot of good and then, like, for example, like own a slave or kill people or something, something like that. So in other words, like, it doesn't matter how much good we do. If we do bad, if we are immoral, if we're evil, like we are, the way we treat these animals in farms, that we pay people to abuse them and torture them so we can get cheaper products, we can expect, that this is our understanding of reality. This is a spiritual, religious understanding that God, this higher power rewards us and punishes us. So it's conceivable to expect that, yes, theoretically, we may be able to develop these vaccines, these antibiotics that are like, immune to resistance, immune to bacteria mutating against them. Theoretically, it's possible, but God, this higher power, may not allow us to get away with that, without ending these factory farms, especially. All right, so that's the basic theme. That's the basic message that we need to understand. And again, I'm reading now a couple of books on pandemics, and the more I read, the more frightening it becomes. Governments don't want to spend the money to develop these treatments, these vaccines. First of all, I mentioned this yesterday, in the past, until 1980 or so, there were government programs here in the United States working on this. But then it all got shifted to the private sector, to the pharmaceutical industry. And these pharmaceutical companies will not devote the resources to investigate potential vaccines unless they see some kind of profit that's going to pay for their investment. And that's the problem. We have another problem is actually we have containment strategies now. They have developed these. A World Health Organization and other organizations that are devoted to basically, figuring out this problem of epidemics, of contagious diseases. They have established protocols and procedures and ways of preventing these pandemics. But there's a major problem. In other words, like, for these procedures to work, they have to be done very early. As soon as, like, for example, someone is detected with a contagious disease and they identify it as being zoonotic and of a specific nature, there are things they can do, but they're expensive. I mean, they're not, you know, relative to what this 8 trillion we were expected to spend on this coronavirus. It's a bargain what these are, but in the minds of politicians, no, because what happens is, you know, in the past, they have implemented these protocols. You know, very early on, they've done these things and they've worked. But the problem is the politicians are not the brightest people in the world. They don't appreciate that that's a success. They doubt the scientists. They say, well, you know, I didn't see anybody, you know, dying from this. I didn't see people like, you know, being spread. And that's because it was caught so early. So yes, we have these ways of you know, scaling up, of making much more effective these containment strategies. But again, you have these political problems that make it difficult. And again, there, you know, I'll raise more caveats, more objections about this this vaccine, you know, pharmaceutical solution in future shows. I'm just learning about it myself. But, you know, from what I've read, that, you know, I can't remember all of it. There's a lot of information. It's just, it's not going to be enough. It won't. So, all right, back to the main point. We need to invest more than $1 billion in this new industry. You know, if we're at this rate, again, in 10, 15 years, we might have these lab-grown meat products in supermarkets, you know, everywhere. But we may be hit with another coronavirus-like pandemic in 5 years or 10 years before this happens. You know, God may punish us again if we don't get it this time, if we don't get how amazingly horrible and evil we've been and are continuing to be. So I mean, I propose, you know, I picked a ballpark figure. And again, this is like, it's not based on any expert analysis. Maybe I'll, you know, find some people who have made this analysis and I'll report that. But basically, the thought came to me, well, if you fast track $50 billion into this, just like they're spending more money on fast tracking the vaccines, you know, that they were thinking, well, it might take 2-3 years for this vaccine to be developed against the COVID-19. Now they're thinking a year and a half, because they're investing so many more resources in it. So I thought to myself, yeah, $50 billion should be able to fast track the research. So instead of having to wait 10 or 15 years for these products to be in supermarkets, maybe we have to wait 3 or 4. And we may be in this current distancing economic shutdown for a year or 2 or perhaps longer. So, I mean, ideally, the best scenario would be to fast track, you know, to spend this money now. And I mean the complete 50 billion, you know, to hire so many more researchers, to give them the resources they need, the labs, you know, whatever they need. And so, like, you know, again, people think, well, $50 billion is a lot. But as I mentioned before, the Congressional Budget Office back in May predicted that this coronavirus is going to cost just the United States about $8 trillion. And is it 8 or maybe 6? I'm not, one or the other. I mean, if you do the math, I got to look at my notes, whatever. But if you do the math, this $50 billion represents about 0.6%, about 0.5% of the money we're going to be spending on this, you know, COVID-19. So I mean, like, for our politicians to not get this, to not get that this is a bargain, to be able to, like, you know, be pandemic free. And, you know, I mean, there's got to be more also, because, like, it has to be a global effort. For example, let's say we develop these vaccines. Okay, let's say we don't go the fast tracking this farm, this cell agriculture, cell-based meat strategy. Well, then let's say we use the vaccines. So like if we go the vaccine route, we're going to have to like ensure that every country in the world does this. I mean, and a lot of the countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, other parts of the world, South America, they don't have the resources to be able to afford this. We do. We can afford this for every country in the world, easily, more than easily. But what I'm trying to say is that this is the kind of global cooperation we're going to need to be free of this. And so part of this, as long as we have to get the entire world involved on being safe from future pandemics, we might as well get the entire world involved in shifting from an omnivore carnist diet to a plant-based diet. A lot of these, for example, in China, China has lifted about 300 million people from extreme poverty in the last several decades. That's almost the number of people in our entire, United States population. I think we're about 330 million now. And the problem with that, and it's not just China, it's throughout the world, is people, move from poverty into the middle class, whatever. They want meat because, meat is touted as a food for the rich, a food for the successful and all. And it's really a bogus kind of, selling, because this meat is just not, it's not essential to our health. I mean, there's so many vegans out there, people who just eat plant-based foods that are actually a lot healthier than us in a lot of ways. They don't get the heart disease that we do. They don't get the cancer. I've been a vegan for 15 years, vegetarian since '92. And so, some people will tell you, well, you need meat to be healthy. No, actually, the meat that we, here in the United States, the number one killer, about 500,000 people, is heart disease. Number one cause of heart disease is red meat, just eating meat. Same with cancer, these meat products, processed meats, So this philosophy that we've sold ourselves and the rest of the world on, that meat is better than plant-based diet, it's just it's so misguided, it's so wrong. So yeah, we'd have to do that. This would have to be kind of like a Manhattan Project that involves the entire world, that teaches people that these plant-based foods are so much healthier, and again, they're so much less expensive, for these developing economies. It's a lot. Think about it. Like beans, rice, grains, wheat. These are major sources of protein that they're much less expensive than the protein we get from beef and chicken and pork. So this is something else. I mean, there's so much more to this. I mean, as we go from about 7.5 billion people right now to perhaps 9.5, 10 billion in 2050, we're going to have to, in the status quo, business as usual, just raise so much more food, grow so much more food to feed these animals, because that, most people don't realize that the vast majority of our crops, they're not feeding people. The corn, the soy, they're feeding animals. And they exhaust our water supplies. Our water resources. I'll go into it in another shows. I've talked about it before. The livestock industry, for example, is responsible for almost 15% of man-made climate change greenhouse gases, which is about the equivalent of the entire transportation industry, the global industry, cars, trains, ships, everything combined. So again, that's what the message is. And I'd like to, continue with this theme of morality. You know, how do we not, I mean, how do you guys, you know, who eat meat and fish and dairy and pay people to do that, how do you do that? How do you not understand the harm you're doing? How do you not understand, you know, that these are sentient beings, that pigs are more intelligent than dogs? You know, they feel pain. You know, these female pigs, while they're pregnant and while they're gestating, after they have their offspring, whatever, they're kept in cages so small many times that they can't even turn around for months and months and months at a time. Chickens, you know, egg-laying chickens are kept cramped together, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 per cage, and the cage is so small that the birds can't even like spread their wings, you know, for weeks at a time, you know, well, actually no, for about a year in that case. And you know, they're stacked on top of each other so the chickens on top are defecating and urinating on the chickens on the bottom, you know, and that's why they have to keep them pumped up with antibiotics you know, because the conditions are so unsanitary. But that, you know, that's suffering, and you're doing this, you know, you're doing that. I don't blame you. You know, this isn't about blame. You know, you were born into this world and nobody's talking about it. Your politicians aren't talking about it. Your clergy isn't talking about it. The media isn't talking about it. So you kind of figure, well, it's just the world. It's just the way things are. But come on. I mean, you know, you graduated generally high school, college. You know, you understand the evil that is being done to these animals. Far worse than slavery, far worse than the Holocaust. I can't think of a greater horror, you know, that we humans have ever done, you know, and we're doing it now. So, all right, well, again, we went through the basic, and again, I'll go over this as, you know, I'm learning more each day as I read the books, and I'll introduce more topics. So, all right, watch this Monday through Friday on channel 76 Optimum, 45 Verizon, on White Plains Community Media. I'm also uploading the episodes to YouTube. I've been really diligent about doing that. I generally upload each episode, you know, even before it airs in White Plains. You know, you catch it the night before. This is airing cable casting tomorrow. So, so think about it. If you believe in God or a higher power that rewards and punishes for what we do and don't do, it's got to make sense to you, for even if it's not for kindness, for compassion, just for self-preservation. You know, if you know, caring for your children and grandchildren, because this is going to just get worse. You know, if you care about all that, then you'll understand that ending farming of animals and transitioning to cellular agriculture is our best method. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.